Good afternoon again. My name is Kevin. I'm a PhD student in the philosophy department and a residential fellow at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics and Culture. And on behalf of the center, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this lecture event. The lecture is a part of a lecture series attached to the program in critical race and ethnic studies. And it's designed to bring to campus scholars and writers whose work is currently being taught here at UChicago. And the series invites current CREST majors and minors, interested students and members of the public to join us for an in-depth conversation, bringing topics discussed within the confines of the classroom into an open forum. For today's talk, as we all know, we'll hear a lecture from Professor Calvin Warren. Professor Warren is an associate professor of African American Studies at Emory University. Warren's research interests are in continental philosophy, Lacanian psychoanalysis, queer theory, Afro-pessimism, and theology. They published their first book in 2018, Ontological Terror, Blackness, Nihilism, and Emancipation. And he is currently working on a second project entitled Onticide, Essays on Black Nihilism and Sexuality, which seeks to unravel the metaphysical foundations of Black sexuality and argues for a rethinking of sexuality without the human, sexual difference, or coherent bodies. Today, in conversation with Professor Warren, we have Professor Kaneesha Parsard, who is an assistant professor of English at the University of Chicago, and their scholarship examines the legacies of slavery and emancipation in the Americas, and in relation to how gender and sexuality structure race, labor, and capital. We'll hear Professor Warren's lecture for 30 minutes or so, and then Professor Parsard will offer some comments to which Professor Warren will respond, and then we'll open a Q&A after that for a wider conversation. Professor Warren's lecture is entitled Turned into a Black Penis, Sexistence, Nihilism, and Subtraction, and we'll hear the lecture now.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to thank Kevin and the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture for this very warm invitation to attend. I'm very honored to be here. And I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience for attending. You could be a number of places today, but you chose to spend this time with me. And I really appreciate it. And I look forward to your questions, your comments. This is a work in progress. It is part of a book that's entitled Onticide, and this is part of a chapter that's entitled Execrated Anatomy. In that chapter, I think through the Black penis, the Black belly as opposed to the womb, and Black transness, all as problems of execration. Today, my focus will be on the Black penis. So again, I look forward to your questions and your comments. So here we go. The Black penis brings into sharp relief with seismic-like force a tremendous problematic, one continental philosophy and Black critical discourses often neglect in noetic pursuits. We can identify this problematic as the inapplicability of ontological and existential frames of reference, the inadequacy of prevailing onto-existential cartographies to situate Blackness. And what are these cartographies? I'll say that there are three. One is notness, the other is nothingness, and the other is being. So these are usually the three cartographies of existence and ontology that orient us. Neither nothingness, notness, nor being provide a generative or reliable resource for conceptualizing what is remarkably non-conceptual. This is also to say that the Black penis indexes the distance between existence and being, and the fantasies of being predicated on nothing's generativity, such as in psychoanalysis and the resurgence of philosophical rationalism and post-Heideggerian thought. The Black penis offers a devastating paradigm of subtracted existence, indeed an execrated existence, where it is subtracted from both the phallus and subtracted from nothingness, excised from meaning and its symbolics, and the precondition for meaning as such. Let us call the operation of excising Black anatomy from the phallus and its delusional plenitude and excising it from nothingness, which is supposedly the anxiety-producing condition for being. Let us call this Black subtraction. So we're going to call this operation Black subtraction. Such subtraction is distinct from our understanding of castration in feminist studies, or the production of letters on the body as psychoanalysis presents it. If the body is cut into erotogenic zones, which according to Serge Leclerc, quote, is the chosen ground for the extreme modifications in which the very notion of organ is subverted because the function and its aim disappear into the order of jouissance, end quote, then the letter marks an absence, a failure of meaning, or sex as failure that will get concealed by the object, the introduction of what he would call a pure difference in the very place of this letter. Then such difference predicated on a loss of a purity, a difference beyond itself, provides symbolic meaning for the body through phallic organization, and the phallic organization we can call conceptuality, negation, notness, etc. Put differently, access to jouissance is predicated on a nothingness at the core of human being, a nothingness that is eclipsed but not quite defeated by the objects of castration and his enterprise of meaning making. Within this psychoanalytic scene, nothingness and the phallus partition the body with a richness of sense and absence, a production that is also a corporeal dissimulation. The body as erotogenic zoning and symbolic carving situate nothingness, and being as a fantasy, as the coordinates and building blocks of existence as such. But today I'd like to introduce another operation from which anti-Black violence excises anatomy from nothingness, notness, and the fantasy of being. Such anatomy is not a direct access to jouissance, since it does not rely on nothingness concealment, nor the conceptuality of notness, since the symbolic lacks a proper object to introduce difference. Such anatomy is subtracted into an abyss without any onto-existential frame of intelligibility, meaning, difference, being, or logic. These body parts are what David Marriott might call moribund, wasted flesh. In other words, Black subtraction produces anatomized things rather than objects of difference, objects of the phallus. The Black penis is such an anatomized thing, an execration without phallic power, difference, or direct access to the jouissance of nothingness. Feminist philosophy has urged us to rethink the relation between the penis and the phallus. The unity between penis and phallus is the patriarchal sign of existential violence, in which anatomy seizes the order of meaning itself as a vicious hierarchy of difference, reserving biofuturistic security to itself at the expense of other objects. The Black penis, however, has been confused with this phallic penis. And it is this very confusion that rituals such as lynching and mutilation were designed to clarify. Again, the Black penis, unfortunately, has been confused with the phallic penis. And it is this very confusion that rituals such as lynching and mutilation were designed to clarify. In a lynching, such as the lynching of Claude Neal, the Black penis is subjected to unrelenting brutality to prove its expulsion from the realm of being and nothingness. Mocking this distance, Claude Neal's lynch mob, they cut off his penis and testicles and made him eat them and proclaim as he was eating them how much he enjoyed it. This ritual for me is a philosophical enactment of Black subtraction. The Black penis, rather than possessing phallic power or any difference that matters, is reduced to a comestible delicacy, beaten and eaten. The Black penis is just food for terroristic enjoyment. This penis, no matter the size, no matter the dimensions, lacks any reliable resource to preserve itself. It is in constant threat of effacement and obliteration. But just as the effacement of the letter and its replacement with the object occur repeatedly for the Lacanian subject, lynching as Black subtraction occur without end in various forms for the Black penis. Philosopher Alain Badiou, in his stimulating piece Towards a New Concept of Existence, argues that the fundamental problem of continental philosophy is to distinguish between being as such, he says, is to distinguish between, quote, being as such, and on the other hand, existence as a category which is precisely not reducible to that of being, end quote. I'll say that again. For Badiou, the fundamental problem of continental philosophy is this: to distinguish between being as such and, on the other hand, existence as a category which is precisely not reducible to that of being. In his reading of Sartre, he says, quote, existence is the effect of nothingness within the full and stupid massiveness of being qua being, end quote. For Badiou, existence is a degree or an intensity, a purity without the phenomenal determinations of identity and difference. The distance between existence and being is the differential intensity between a thing as a multiplicity, an opening of the void, and the self-sameness of something in the world as identity. The thing precedes the object, just as the letter precedes and is concealed by the object for psychoanalysis. This thing is the void or empty set from which all possibilities, all conditions as such are birthed. For Badiou, existence is a category of logic to the extent it names the, quote, value of an identity function, the measure of the identity of a thing to itself. What is then of interest to our discussion, however, here is his remark that, quote, if the degree of identity of a thing itself is in the minimal degree, we can say it does not exist in the world. The thing is in the world, but with an intensity which is equal to zero. So we can say that its existence is non-existence. The thing is in the world, but its appearance in the world is the destruction of its identity. So the being there of this being is to be the inexistent of the world, end quote. Now let's expand Badiou's philosophy of existence into the body itself, which is why we are here assembled, and argue this, at the risk of misreading, that if the phallus, that it is the phallus that determines the intensity of existence within the world. Again, it is the phallus that determines the intensity of existence within the world. The distance from the phallus determines identity and ipseity, ipseity being meaning the self-sameness, being proper to itself. It differentiates the thing with zero intensity from the phallic object with maximal intensity. The Black penis is the very thing from such a great distance from the phallus with an intensity of zero. Black existence is inexistent. I would also add that the Black belly, as opposed to the white womb, is also another anatomy of zero intensity, cast outside of the realm of difference and nothingness, as I've made the case in an article that I've published entitled Improper Bodies. The Black penis then appears as an effacement, as a formulation David Marriott has also argued. But David Marriott's void and abyss is not the void of the null set for Badiou. This zero intensity of existence is a body without any reference other than incessant effacement itself, a body without organs, without the animating objects of the phallus. Gender, in this sense, is but a crystallization Blackness is always already undoing. Black anatomy cannot rely on the lure of gender to provide conceptual relief for anatomical difference or coherent identity. Black in existence is an execration of existence itself, an intensity that effaces intensity into something like inertia. Indeed, there isn't a scale of measure that can situate Black anatomy. The Black penis is a problem for thought. Frantz Fanon provides another entry point into this problematic. More than any other philosopher preceding him, I think he realized that Black genitals docketed a problem ontology could not explain. In Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon argued the Black penis is the site of an annihilation, a denial from the realm of axiology, which is value, and ethical relation. For him, he says, quote, in relation to the Negro, everything takes place on the genital level, end quote. If we are to take Fanon seriously in the expansiveness of this Black everything, we realize that existence itself is a genital determination. Again, we realize that Black existence itself is a genital determination, but such genital existence is an annihilation of the very everything, which is why I think the Black genital brings us to the pre-logical regressive stages. Cast outside of Hegelian ontologic, which is the reduction of ontology to logic, and without the fixation of difference as an ontological fantasy, Black genitals, and for Fanon, the Black penis in particular, incites a fear of biology itself. He says, quote, the Negro is only biological. Such phobia, and here he means Negrophobia, is a fear of the biological itself, end quote. Such fear, we can argue, is the terror of subtracted organs, anatomies that operate in fantasy without any existential substance or any existence that matters. In response to Michel Cournot's claim, and this is a literary person who Fanon is responding to, Michel Cournot writes this, quote, the Black man's sword is a sword. 4 Negroes with their penises exposed would fill an entire cathedral. They would be unable to leave the building until their erections had subsided, end quote. Fanon avers to this what seems like a very hyperbolic and eroticized stupidity. He says, quote, one is no longer aware of the Negro, but only of a penis. The Negro is eclipsed. He is turned into a penis. He is a penis, end quote. The emergence of the Black penis eclipses identity, let's call that the Negro, and introduces an annihilation in the order of existence, eclipsing as annihilation. Perhaps replacing the Negro is not too strong of a term to employ here, but the penis subtracts something from the Negro, leaving a humongous void that is both erect and dangerous. But what do we make of this tropological formulation, quote, he is turned into a penis? This turning is unlike the Althusserian subject who after being hailed, turns into the very subject he always already was. The turn into is without a destination. It is a turn that constantly annihilates itself, making the into a deceptive preposition. If one definition of into is to describe where something is, then such turning annihilates the spatial coordinates of the preposition, since no isness registers at the level of the Black genital. It is cast outside of logic and being, So to be turned into a Black penis is an inconceivable turn, a turn not into something, but a turn into an abyss of reason, logic, meaning, and difference. But what of this transformation, if we could call it that? What does it mean that the Negro is not only eclipsed, but also transformed, turned into a Black penis? Such transformation transitions from the object, the very object Fanon came into the world imbued with meaning, into the thing, the anatomy of such low intensity that it exists to not exist as inexistent. The Negro, although a problem for thought, provides an accretion of degraded meanings in the order of meaning. But Blackness, or the Black penis, marks the distance from this identity, even from negativity. So let me clarify that. What I've argued here is that the Negro might constitute an accretion or a set of degraded meanings, even negative meanings, a negative conceptuality. But Blackness, or the Black penis, marks a distance even from negativity and identity as such. To be turned into a Black penis is the work of anti-Black violence, reducing the intensity of existence to zero, rendering anatomy abject, out of place, and without a place. So let's take two examples. So here, if I'm able, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get two examples.
You shouldn't have been out, though. You know, it's keeping them honest. AC 360, CNN weeknights, 8 Eastern.
A Ford Explorer on the side of a street in Staten Island, New York. The car seats remain, where two little boys, Brandon and Connor Moore, were sitting as their mother Glenda was driving during Hurricane Sandy, desperately looking for shelter.
The story of what happened to Glenda and her sons Brandon and Connor is sad, horrifying, terrifying. She was driving her SUV down this street. It plunged into this hole during the height of Hurricane Sandy. She then got out of the vehicle with her 2-year-old son and her 4-year-old son. Remember, it is pouring rain, torrential, the wind's 90 miles per hour. And she comes over here to this tree and holds onto the tree, grabs the branches, grabs the tree, and holds onto it, and holds onto her sons at the same time. And she did this, according to police, for hours. That's what she told the police. She then said she went up to this house right behind me, knocked on the door. A man was inside and pleaded with him, let us inside your house. She says, according to police, the man would not let her in the house with her sons. She then went to the back, stood on the balcony, took a flower pot, tried to break the window to break into the house, wasn't able to, and ultimately floodwaters came through and swept her sons away.
Everyone was wishing for a miracle in the search for the children, but there really wasn't any optimism the boys would be found alive. New York City police used a fan boat to look for them in the nearby marsh. Police divers walked through that swampy marsh. Sadly, the bodies of both children were found not far from each other, about a quarter-mile away from where Glenda last held them. Family members say Glenda is too distraught to talk to us. We wanted to meet the man who lived in the house where police say Glenda sought protection. Nobody answered the door. But while we were standing near the house on public property, an angry man appeared.
Get the hell out. Stop filming in my house. No cameras here. Stop. Stop.
Sir,
Get out.
sir.
Get the hell out.
Can I ask you a question? Did the woman knock on your door to get
No,
in?
sir. No, sir.
Alan did not want to say his last name, but the house in question is his, and he says he was inside during the hurricane.
One more time. The police say that Glenda came with her 2 sons, knocked on your door,
No, sir.
begged to go in during the hurricane.
No, sir. Absolutely not.
So you did not see a woman with 2 children.
No, absolutely not.
So what you told the police is not accurate.
Absolutely. I never saw anybody. I only saw the man.
So you said you saw a man come to your door.
Yes. He didn't come to the door. There's stairs in the back of the house, and he came. He was standing he must have been standing at the bottom of the stairs.
And what did he do?
He took a concrete flower pot. I can show you there's one in the backyard. There were 2 of them. He threw one of them through the door.
Okay, what they're saying is that she, after you didn't let her in, that she tried to break the window and get in. So is it possible you're mistaken?
Because
I had to stay there all night. Sat all night with my back against the door in the kitchen.
Well, let me ask you, if a man threw a flower pot, did you let the man in your house?
He didn't ask to come in. He asked me to come out and help him.
So did you help him?
I couldn't. What could I do to help him?
All right, so
I'm wearing the same clothes. I had these shorts on. This is my brother's jacket. I had a pair of shorts on with flip-flops. And I was going to come out.
But when it comes down to it, you're saying you did not see a woman and two children.
No, sir.
You saw a man.
A man, yes.
I mean, you must feel terrible for this woman and her two children, right?
Yeah. Did they find the children? I don't even know.
Yeah, they found them. They found them dead today.
Of course, it's a tragedy. Of course, absolutely. It's unfortunate. She shouldn't have been out, though. You know, it's one of those things. She shouldn't have been on the road.
Well, a lot of people are, though, sir.
Yeah.
And they look for help sometimes.
There's nothing I could do. I'm not a rescue worker. The mayor said, people said, rescue workers don't endanger the lives of rescue workers. If I would have been outside, I would have been dead.
Alan?
Okay. So we take that example of Glenda Moore, and the neighbor, Alan, saw a man through the throwing a flower pot. And Glenda is described as a 5 foot, 130 pound female. She was transformed into what I'm calling, she's turned into a Black penis from an object with a dejected meaning, a Black female, into what he is calling a man. And I will argue here that man is an inaccurate term to describe something much more difficult, and that is to say that she has been turned into what he was really wanting to say is a Black penis. Had her body elicited a mutual recognition of humanity, of womanhood, of motherhood, of femininity, etc., perhaps Alan, being a good neighbor, would have let her in and helped her rescue her 2 sons. But what he saw through the screen as an abyss was a man. The man with the huge penis, so large that it was virtually impossible for him to even open the door if he'd want to. And this is why he had to sit with his back against the door for the entire night. This Black penis, dangerous, biology, aggressive, renders language an inadequate conduit. Black woman and Black man lose any ontological or existential integrity. So what he saw was an inexistent body. It is this man with the inescapable penis, the penis one must excise and subtract that he feared. What he saw was pure biology without concept. Let's take one more example of this.
Was on trial near the entrance of the Bradfield Farms community in eastern Mecklenburg County. Reedy Creek Road is wide and gently curving. It also lacks lights. And on the morning of September 14th, 2013, that proved treacherous to a Charlotte man who had dropped off a friend after a night of work and socializing. Sometime around 2:30, John Ferrell's car left the pavement and went hurtling into these trees. He freed himself, losing his cell phone, and then started walking this direction on Reedy Creek Road. John Ferrell walked more than a quarter of a mile southeast back into Bradfield Farms. He stopped at the first house that he came to along the street. Inside, a young mother and her infant child were sleeping. She was jostled awake by banging at her front door. When she opened it, she saw a stranger, Jonathan Ferrell. She slammed the door shut and called 911.
911, hello? I need help. Where are you at? There's a guy breaking in my front door.
There's a guy breaking in your front door? Do you know this person?
Yeah, he was walking in. I opened the door and thought it was my husband.
So he's a black male?
Oh my God.
I know. Is he still in the house? Did he leave yet?
No, he's not in the house. He's in the front yard yelling. Oh my God, please.
Wes Carrick was the first Charlotte Mecklenburg police officer to arrive. He approached the home, but stopped after he heard yelling behind him. By that time, another police officer had driven up, and together, he and Carrick in their squad cars headed in the direction of the noise.
Because she knows the suspect. That's going to be negative. She does not know the subject. She thinks he was wearing either khakis or jeans, green shirt. She thinks he might have left the yard because the motion light went off.
Here on what residents know as the Pool Road, the events of September 14th quickly came to a climax. John Ferrell and two Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers met in this general area. Within seconds, Ferrell lay dead in this ditch.
16 shots fired, suspect down.
He by shot fired.
Careful.
All units on traffic.
Well, suspect was hit, suspect is down at this time.
Ferrell's autopsy showed he'd been struck by 10 bullets, most of them fired from close range. Later that day, Wes Carrick became the first Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer in at least 30 years to be charged with an on-duty shooting. Now, Carrick goes on trial for voluntary.
Okay, so Jonathan Ferrell is another imperiled Black body in need of help who was also transformed at the moment of a crisis into a Black penis, from the Negro as object to the Black penis as thing. One, I think of the characteristics of being turned into a Black penis or of being a Black penis is that nothing that comes out of one's mouth makes any sense. Cries for help or explanations or reasoning of distress devolve into a pre-logical babble, as such anatomies do not make sense or mark an absence from speech itself in an abyss. So one question that we can ask ourselves here is, did Alan, the good Staten Island neighbor, and the terrified woman at home with her 2 children see the same thing? Did they see a Black penis which required immediate subtraction from the order of sense? And I say this because both Jonathan and Glenda, I am pretty sure, tried explaining what was happening to them, that they were in crisis, that they had an emergency, that they needed assistance. But no matter how eloquent they were or how clear they were, nothing that came out of their mouth was making sense. And this is because the Black penis as thing does not make sense. It cannot use language as a reliable conduit to protect or preserve life or existence. So this is to say that the deaths of Jonathan Ferrell and Glenda Moore's 2 sons illumine an inexistent paradigm within which Black penises are constantly annulled and annihilated by a hostility and a hatred of phobic proportions. In his groundbreaking work, The Man Not, Tommy J. Curry describes this turn in this way, this turn without a destination. And he says that it is, quote, a negation not from origin of human being, but from nility, a negation from nility, end quote. Non-being expresses the condition of Black male being, the nility from which it is birthed, end quote. Nility then births Black males into non-presence and stiffens the Black penis into oblivion. Curry's emphasis on Black male vulnerability is a condition of topological inescapability, meaning one cannot avoid subtraction. For those bodies with a fixed penis, either on the actual body or the penis is affixed to them through fantasy, like Glenda Moore, nility is the precondition for Black male existence, much like nothingness, according to Heidegger's essay, What is Metaphysics, is the condition of being itself and gives birth to the notness of metaphysics. The nility which gives birth to Black males, I argue, is the abyss subtracted from nothingness, notness, and being. Subtraction produces Black existence, but we lack the language or concepts to precisely name what such existence is. Unlike Jean-Luc Nancy's subject birth into presence, the Black body affixed with the penis, the Black penis, is subtracted from presence itself, anatomy as an enigma. So then we can say that Curry's hyphenated term, man-not, translates into an existential arithmetic of violence, which means that we can translate the hyphen into a subtraction sign, that man is subtracted from not, but whatever lies on the other side of that equal sign is something without grammar, without concept, without an answer. It is the abyss. So to close here, turning into a Black penis provides a devastating paradigm for existence without concept, an existence only perceptible through the fleeting flicker of annihilation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much, Professor Warren. Thank you for this talk and for the opportunity to be in conversation today. As a scholar working in the idiom of Black feminisms, among others, I've learned much in recent years about the critical project it asks of us, the debate it requires of us, as Jennifer Nash charges us to let go of tightly held intellectual genealogies and postures in favor of conceptual renewal. And much in this way, as you question the role of the Black penis vis-a-vis gender intelligibility and therefore gender studies or Black feminisms, I've really valued this opportunity to learn and think more deeply about my own intellectual and disciplinary taken for granted. My first set of comments or questions is about the equation that underlies your paper and its formal logic. As you argue, quote, the Black penis is an organ subtracted from nothingness, from notness. I'm interested in how philosophical or mathematical formalism helps us understand the ontological status of the Black penis and of Black being more generally, or as you might put it in your first book, Ontological Terror, the nothing of Black being. I thought of Denise Ferreira da Silva's formalism in her 2018 essay, Hacking the Subject, Black Feminism and Refusal Beyond the Limits of Critique. And mine is a kind of curious associative logic because in many ways, da Silva's project or argument here could be thought of as the inverse of yours. So da Silva, in conversation with Nahum Chandler, gestures to how Blackness, Black genders or genres, and Black intellectual traditions pose a problem for thought because, to quote her, Blackness and womanhood refuses to comply with the formulations of racial and gender sexual emancipatory projects these categories guide, end quote. But on the other hand, her formulation of the Black male is quite different than yours. While you argue that because the Black penis is not and cannot be a phallus, da Silva argues, quote, not that the Black male is outside the patriarch form, but that he has been written to signify a failing, a negative or pathological exercise of patriarchal authority, end quote. And so my first set of questions is, can you say more about the difference between the Black penis as subtracted from nothingness or notness, and therefore not or never patriarchal in form, and the Black male as the negation of patriarchal authority? So to put it another way, what do we learn when the Black penis or the Black male and patriarchy are not in negative relation, but in no relation to one another at all? Which is related to another question I have. What are the stakes for such an argument for Black feminisms? Then, as you take up Frantz Fanon's assertion that everything takes place on the genital level, in the cases of Claude Neal, Glenda Moore, and Jonathan Ferrell, you also take up Althusserian interpolation in order to understand how one might be turned into a Black penis. In each of these cases of anti-Black violence, this is, as you described, an anti-tropological turn where one turns into an abyss. And as your cases travel across time and geography, 1934, Jackson County, Florida, 2012, Staten Island, New York, and 2013, Charlotte, North Carolina, to me, this turn also sounds iterative, in which Blackness is continually falling into the abyss. And in this way, it sounds to me almost like a nihilistic inversion of Fred Moten's concept of cut interpolation, and cut interpolation as a kind of incomplete christening or becoming, where your formulation instead of the turn is a continuous unbecoming. And further, you describe how in these cases, Black utterance, in particular Moore and Ferrell's calls for help, become not only unintelligible, but nonsense. I'm interested in how this proposition about being turned into a Black penis might gain force from Wittgenstein's approach to proposition itself, where proposition is in part about the distinction between sense and nonsense. He sets out to, quote, draw a limit to thinking, a limit that can only be drawn in language, and what lies on the other side of the limit will simply be nonsense, end quote. I'm also thinking about how the nonsense of Black utterance has a companion in the reason and authority of white testimony. You draw attention to how the screen enacts the Staten Island homeowner's ability to only see a man in Moore's presence. And similarly, in Ferrell's case, there's a brief alliance formed between the woman and the 911 dispatcher when the dispatcher says, "I know," in response to her fear of the Black man who shows up at her door. And to take it a step further, in a very different, or perhaps not so different case, Claude Neal's penis becomes what you call a comestible delicacy through the act of ventriloquism, where he's only audible when he's made to repeat, or worse yet, speak for his violators. So I would love to hear your thoughts kind of at the nexus of nonsense, testimony, and ventriloquism. And to close, I would like to return to Glenda Moore and to your broader work. I'm wondering if you could talk about more in conversation with this current work on the Black penis, but also with your work on the Black belly. In conversation with Saidiya Hartman, you write that the Black belly is, quote, a non-place of improperness. And I'm also thinking again about moments in which Black language is intelligible, actually, and even clarifying for understanding what you call excreted anatomy most broadly. I'm thinking, and I'm a Caribbeanist, of the expression ban your belly or band your belly in Trinidad and Tobago, which, to quote Dianis Popova, quote, indicates the need to steel yourself for difficult times ahead. And it refers to the practice from enslavement of using a cloth band to support a pregnant belly when engaged in field work and other hard work, end quote. And this is a turn of phrase that I thought of as I listened to your paper and thought about your work, because it productively foregrounds the belly rather than the womb or motherhood as categories of analysis. So if, as you say, the Black belly is outside of gender, sexual difference, and sexuality, and is forgotten in your conversation with Gere, does this Trinbagonian phrase, banya belly, and can Black utterance around the belly more generally be a gesture to not only the problem of being outside, quote, the panoply of sexuality and therefore of being, but also to the burden of navigating that non-being, that exclusion, that forgetting? Can it be an injunction to, as you say, think with the improper? So I'll stop there. I want to thank you again for your paper, and I look forward to your thoughts into the Q&A.
Yes, thank you. Really profound and stimulating insight here. So I will touch on a few of them, and then maybe we can continue in question and answer. In terms of formal logic and mathematical formalism, one of the things that I do appreciate about Denise da Silva is that part of her mathematical experiments is to turn math against itself to render it nonsensical. It is to expose the nonsense that is at the center of the mathematical project, which she describes as the the kind of project of Western reason. I think in a similar way, what I am doing is turning math against itself. It's a formalism that mocks formalism. So when I say subtraction, I am playing off of something subtracted from nothing, but we know in order for something to be subtraction, there needs to be something on the other side of the equal sign in order for it to be a true subtractive enterprise or arithmetic. The subtraction that I have in mind doesn't yield anything, not even a sign of nonsense, which distinguishes me from De Silva. So part of what De Silva does is she introduces a mathematical sign of, I think, what is it? Infinity minus infinity, or an infinity divided by infinity, which is, nonsensical, but it's a mathematical sign of nonsense. I am arguing that organs within the abyss don't even have a sign that would identify them as nonsense. So it is to say that mathematical formalism, when Black thought mocks it and tries to turn it inside out, if one is to take the abyss seriously, it would mean that whatever subtractive violence occurs will equal something that we have no concept for, not even a sign of nonsense. And I guess that is what would bring us to the, her experiment with the patriarchal authority and form. Part of that experiment is also to situate or to present the Black woman as the form which undermines form itself. But in order for her to do that, she has to preserve a conceptuality within the Black male form in order to keep it going. And I think that her justification for doing that is to argue that the Black male is a negative or failed patriarchy, rather than to argue that the Black male is excluded from patriarchy altogether as a human being, right? So it's not that the Black I think under her operation, the Black male is not excluded from patriarchy. The Black male just represents the negation of patriarchy. But the negation of patriarchy is a conceptuality, right? That is the myth of criminology. That is the myth of Negro inferiority. That is the myth of Negro stupidity, right? That those myths, those stereotypes are still within our concepts as negation. Now, what I am arguing is that the Black penis strips us of concepts, even the concept of negation. To sum this up again, to try for more precision, what I'm arguing is that she's using the conceptuality of negation as a way of factoring the Black penis within patriarchy. And I'm arguing that she misunderstands the Black penis. The Black penis is not a failed phallus. The Black penis is without the phallus. And to be without the phallus is not the same as to negate the phallus. So she, I don't think, has a substantial presentation of negation here. And I think that's what makes her mathematical formula here fail. And in light of that, I don't think reducing the Black woman to the nonsense of formalism is as effective for understanding the Black belly either. Because just as the Black penis is outside of the phallus, so is the Black belly. And the Black belly is not a sign of nonsense, rather the Black belly is without concept. So very quickly, Althusser and the continuous fall. It is absolutely right. I think I am moving through, time. I think I said this morning in the class, I have an irreverence for historiography and its linear temporality and this idea of change over time. It doesn't matter whether it's the early 19th century, whether it is the 21st century, we see that the Black penis has been subtracted from the phallus in all of these ways. So we can call it a continuity, right? We can call it not an Althusserian turn into something, but it is a turn that just turns, right? It is a turn without a destination. It is a turn that can never be complete. You mentioned, I think, Fred Moten in Cut Interpolation, incomplete, the incompletion of a turn. You know, incomplete. I mean, I think I would say that the turn into an abyss cannot be complete or incomplete. It's just a turn. There's no end of completion that renders it intelligible. Wittgenstein, I think that's really beautiful to think about sense and nonsense as drawing the limit to thinking. When someone, for example, if we were to read Wittgenstein with Nahum Chandler together to think about the Negro as a problem for thought, one of the things that we could think about is that we are using the term nonsense here for intelligibility. But as I've been arguing with Denise da Silva, nonsense doesn't quite capture expulsion from conceptuality. The methodological problem that I have is that I don't have a term. Any term I use is going to be conceptuality. So I'm trying to present an impossible project. And so I would say we could write nonsense under erasure, right? It's the best that we can do to describe being outside of conceptuality, because that's usually what we designate nonsense. But at least with nonsense, we can still give it some sense of an understanding, right? We could just say when a baby is babbling, we can say, oh, that's cute nonsense, right? You know, Google, right? Cute nonsense, but it is not like that is without conceptuality at all. So, you know, I think what Wittgenstein's, you know, kind of analytic and reading him with Nahum Chandler would get us to think about is the limit of thinking beyond concept. That's the problem for Blackness in the Abyss, is that we do not have the protocol for thinking outside of conceptuality. And every attempt to do that draws us back into conceptuality, right? So we end up trying to do these experimental anti-humanist projects as a way of articulating what can't quite be articulated. I'll close just by saying yes to you know, your reading of The Black Belly. And the utterance, the burden of non-being. What I find really instructive, or one of the things that I find really interesting about David Marriott and Black language is that for him, the Black does not have a language. That whenever the Black speaks, the Black ventriloquizes whiteness. So it's to say that when one is without conceptuality, one does not have a language from which to make any demand, that even the language that we use in which we think we are uttering a complete demand against anti-Blackness ends up within that double bind of speaking whiteness. So for me, the issue of language that you pointed out is the definition of intellectual Black suffering. Right? It is the way that Black intellectuals suffer. We suffer because we have to use a language to articulate something that undermines it at the very act of articulation. And the best that we can do is tarry with that, you know, with that failure, with that inadequacy, hoping that something seeps through the problem of language. But, you know, if we are in the profession of using language to make statements, and language is the house of being, as Heidegger has said, and we are outside of it, what are we going to do? You know, I think this is a bit more than using the master's tools to do something else. It is to say that, you know, whatever we do with the master's tools will still be left with the master. So how do you negotiate with the master in language? That's a question that I am still working through, and I'm pretty sure that I probably won't ever have the answer. But I do invite anyone else who has thoughts about the problem of Blackness in language to chime in. But thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Parsard. The Q&A is now open for questions. If you have a question, you raise your Zoom hand and I'll call on you. Or if you prefer, you can type your question in the chat and we'll read it. As we wait for hands to be raised, I would like to follow up on the question around nonsense. I understand that you want to reject even the use of nonsense as a term to capture the unthinkability of the Black penis. And I wanted to, and I heard the response that you gave, but I wanted to know what we miss if we employ the term nonsense. Given that in Wittgenstein, nonsense is not trying to give meaning to the meaningless, but it is a stand-in for the unthinkable, right? So it's in some ways the absence of concepts or the absence of language, insofar as language is a space for meaning. So whenever we're referring to the meaningless or the unthinkable, then we might use the nonsense as a stand-in term, understanding that we do not even know what it means, right? So I wanted to know if your reading of it is different, and if so, what we lack if we employ it to describe the unthinkability of the Black penis.
Mm-hmm. Well, one question I would have is, what is the purpose of stand-ins? Why do we need a stand-in? We need a stand-in because we're trying to incorporate the unthinkable into the thinkable. So it's one of those kind of playing dodgeball with the language game. We're using a stand-in for the unthinkable to introduce the unthinkable into the thinkability. And what I'm arguing is that stand-in, even though it tries to gesture to what is beyond it, can never get beyond itself, right? It's to say that what differentiates the abyss from the stand-in of unthinkability is that there is something that fills the space, even if this, what is filling the space is, a problem for thought. The abyss, however, I think doesn't even allow for that, right? The abyss does not work through metonym and displacement and condensation and all of these other operations of standing in the way that, that we would want. So in answer to your question, I think you're asking, what do we lose? I think what we lose is absolute, and I'm using the term absolute, again, lack of a better term, but absolute non-conceptuality, where a stand-in doesn't even register for thinkability. And it, perhaps it's a problem of logic, right? Perhaps it is the way that we use symbols logically to try to get beyond symbolism itself. But there is something within, for example, mathematical formulations in which even something like an imaginary number as a stand-in for something that's without conception is still used to sustain the edifice of mathematics, just as nonsense as a stand-in is used to sustain the infrastructure of philosophy. We use the stand-in so that we can keep philosophizing. We can say that there is something beyond the limit, but it will not, limit thinking as such. I think the abyss throws thinking into crisis, into ways that the stand-in doesn't. So that's really what I want to get at, is that whenever we use a stand-in for nonsense, or nonsense as a stand-in, or a symbol like infinity divided by infinity as a stand-in, we preserve the very thing that we're claiming to undermine. And that is not the abyss.
Thank you. I also wanted to hear about the terror that the Black penis embodies. And you arguing that in your lecture that it's the terror of subtracted organs. And then I wanted to know whether the argument is that the terror is of the subtraction, or if it's the terror within the illusion that the Black penis is confused in some ways with the phallus. And then I'm not sure if there's a difference between these two conceptions, but in my mind, there seems to be. And I wanted to hear if it's the terror of one or of the other.
Well, I think they're different. The terror of Blackness being the Black penis being united with the phallus is that we misapply phallic power to that which does not have it. So I think this makes bodies with Black penises more vulnerable because we translate their suffering into patriarchal failure rather than ontological execration, right? We do what Denise da Silva did rather than what Frantz Fanon did, right? So I think the problem of uniting the penis and the phallus is a severe misrecognition of the execrated position of the Black penis. The terror of subtraction is to be homeless conceptually. And when you're homeless, you're completely vulnerable, right, to the velocities of theory, right? You can be hit by a deconstruction truck. Well, let me not say that. I don't want to get any emails from Derridians. But, you know, you can be hit by a philosophy truck in the middle of the road because you have no safe place. So I think what happens is when you're without the covering of being, when you're without the covering of nothingness generativity, you're without any philosophical protection, right? There's nothing that would provide any ethical stance, for lack of a better term, to protect and preserve your body. So, for example, when I think about lynching, and I think about all of those people strung on trees and burnt to death and mutilated, there was absolutely no protection for them, right? There was nothing that they can do or anyone around them. And why was that? It was because they were so stripped and denuded from human beingness. It was that they were stripped and denuded from ethics, ethical relation. They were denuded from any of the things that we would claim would sustain one's life. That's the terror, right? There's no hiding place. You can't hide under ethics. You can't hide under being. You can't hide under nothingness. You know, you can't be a Sartrean and hide under nothingness generativity, right? You can't hide under petit objet a in there's nothing. So to be in a position of complete exposure, to me, is terrifying. And I read many of the ways that we have handled the Black penis as precisely that.
Thank you.
I hope I haven't decimated thought altogether where people have just zoned out. But, you know, no question, you know, is off limits. So please, if you think of something, feel free to ask.
No, I don't think so. I think you've opened up so much for us. Oh, it looks like there's a hand from Jennifer Williams.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask briefly. Also, that was an accident. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I was going to put my question in the chat, but it just happened. I was just curious to hear more about the influence that Tommy Curry has had, Tommy Curry's work has had in your thinking and in your work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I kind of articulated at in the talk the influence that he's had. One of the things that I think is so very generative about Tommy's book is that the Black male is birthed in nihility. And I think that's so profound, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone discuss it in terms of Tommy Curry. I'm very curious why no one ever takes it up. They're interested in other things. But for me, I thought that was one of the most profound things that I'd ever read. What does that mean, to be birthed in nihility? And when I started thinking about what nihility would mean, to me, it was a redoubled subtraction. It meant to be subtracted from nothingness and to be subtracted from notness. And that is nihility to me. And so when he talks about a theory of Black male vulnerability, I think that is so much more philosophically profound than I think that we have understood. What he is saying in my reading of him is that what makes Black males so vulnerable is this birthing in nihility, subtracted from metaphysical notness, subtracted from ontological nothingness, and just being an exposed, vulnerable penis. So the book in its various iterations and chapters wants to track this birth of nihility, right? So, for me, for my, and you're talking about asking about my work personally, for me personally, that was one of the most profound things that I'd ever read. And I think that it really put Frantz Fanon's arguments about the abyss into sharper view for me. So that's precisely, I think, one of the major influences that I get from his work. And I hope that my work can delve into, the abyss of nihility and the way that Black life is imperiled because Black existence is formed out of this abyss of nihility. What he calls nihility is what Frantz Fanon calls the abyss, right? And so thinking about being birthed from an abyss is so profound and resonating to me that I think I've just been, at the tip of the iceberg of something really revolutionary. That's a revelation. And so I really tarry with that idea, right? So in short, although it might seem trivial to other people, to me, in my reading practice, when I read that just kind of haunted me. What does it mean to be birthed out of nihility? Not nothingness, right? We're not Heideggerians or not Sartrean, right? Like we're not Lacanians, right? Like I get the nothing, but the complete nihility. For me, it was adumbrating a philosophy of Black existence that I don't think that we even have the language to understand. So I think the Black male becomes a paradigm of nihility in a way that we haven't quite acknowledged. And I think this paper was in my intention to track that path a little further.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the response.
And I thought I saw another hand up as I was looking. If you want to re-raise your hand. Okay. Noah.
Hi. So I your talk reminded me of a part in your book Ontological Terror, the chapter on catachristic fantasy. This is on page 149. I'm just going to read a little bit because I'm kind of trying to figure this out. The top of the page says, we might suggest that the Negro marks the obliteration of the sign, as Baudrillard and other postmodern semioticians might insist, but the Negro as fantastical sign exists for this obliteration. The destruction of the sign is the function of the Negro in an anti-Black world. The Negro is the nodal point of semiotics, and at this 0 point of saturation, the Negro exists to be obliterated continuously, not just physically, but also semiotically. What is buried deep within the collective past is precisely the metaphysical holocaust that renders the Negro an impossible referent, one that does not lend itself to substitutions easily. I'm going to go down a bit. We could describe it as the phallus of the Lacanian phallus for the human. It is a nonsensical sign buried deeply within a global unconscious. The Negro then is a sign that is not a sign. Nothing we're able to recognize or incorporate into the chain of associations and signifiers that provide meaning and interpretation for the world. So I'm a bit confused about the relation to the Lacanian phallus because, and I haven't read a whole lot of Lacan, but from what I understand, it's the idea that the act of signification sort of undoes what is meant to be signified, right? And the phallus is what sits at the nexus of trying to symbolize the imaginary, let's say, and it produces the real. Well, when you're talking about this destruction and obliteration, I can't quite wrap my head around how does this tie into, for Lacan, the phallus as being that which produces the real? Because you're talking about obliteration and not production. So I'll just pose the question as that.
I would challenge your definition of the phallus. I don't think that it is the phallus that produces the real as much as the phallus which stabilizes the symbolic. So the phallus is the nonsense signifier that brings a signifying chain into motion. It is what is designed to stabilize the various forms of substitution and signification within which the subject as sign will find themselves. So when I say the phallus of the phallus, for what I understand Lacan saying is that there is a nonsensical sign for which the signified is completely fluid within, that sets the signifying chain into motion for every subject. Part of the psychoanalytic process is to trace the signs back through to the origin of the nonsense of this phallus. And once one finds the nonsensical that brings sense into being, then one can start to traverse the subject's fantasies at the nexus of the symbolic and the real. What I'm arguing is that if there is a nonsensical sign that sets the signifying process and semiotics into motion, then perhaps there is a nonsense that sets that nonsense into motion. And the nonsense, here we go, nonsense, right? But the nonsense that sets that nonsense into motion, to me, is Blackness. And when I quoted, I think it was, who was it, Mark? Someone said that the division between the signifier and the signified was the transatlantic slave trade, right? It was slavery that initiated our new symbolic order and provided meaning for it. Now, if that is the case, although that's a very provocative claim, then that would mean that there was something undergirding even the nonsense of the phallus. So for me, that was what I was trying to get at. You know, that the origin of this semiotic violence is predicated on another nonsense that perhaps we need a protocol, an analytic to get back through. Your response.
Yeah, that clarifies my question. I think I would be a bit, I would have to think about this a bit more. I mean, the idea of a nonsense being, you know, like coming forth from another nonsense might beg a regress for me. But I think, as you said in your talk, nonsense is not a good word to,
Mm-hmm.
to get at what
It's
you're
the
trying.
best we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe elsewhere in your book where you describe, you know, the black body as being stripped of flesh, it kind of gets at this idea as it's not some object in the sense that the phallus is, I don't know if I'm using petit object as a separate thing here, but you know, it's not something bounded per se as much as it is nihil itself, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, the thing that sets objet petit a into motion is the very nothingness around which the subject covers itself with the signifier. And part of the jouissance of the letter is that the objet petit a is a kind of remnant of that erotogenic zone, that erotic body. But this is to say that what keeps the object A going is the generativity of nothingness, right? So for Lacan, the subject is nothingness that has molded around the, or that has around itself been molded the symbolic, the sign. So I think he said in one lecture that the subject is the vase and the nothingness within the vase. What makes the vase is that nothingness has been surrounded by a signifying system. And for him, that is the subject. But what is at the core of the subject is nothingness. So nothingness is generative of subjectivity for Lacan, I think. And what I am arguing is that Blacks cannot rely on the generativity of nothingness because they've been subtracted from that as well. So if, you know, the most radical iteration of nothingness might be Lacanian psychoanalysis, I'm arguing that that real of nothingness is a racial privilege and it's not a universal, you know, generativity. And in response to that, I say that the Black, as Tommy Curry has said, is birthed out of nility, right? So in this instance, petit objet a doesn't help us very much. You know, it helps the human and it explains the human's fantasy within the symbolic in the jouissance experience, but I don't know if the same can be said for the Black.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
These are great questions.
Jamie, go ahead.
Hi, y'all. So I'm trying to process how to articulate the question, but I'm kind of obsessed with your article on calling into being transness. So I'm just interested in maybe the ways in which you're kind of problematizing or taking up transness. And it may not be in relationship to the Black penis, but I'm just interested in maybe how you're kind of thinking about it as an analytic in relationship to the larger kind of framework you're working through in this chapter in your book. Yeah, I mean, as a trans scholar, I'm just like trying to think Afro-pessimism and trans studies and Blackness. So yeah, just interested in where those kind of like lines of thought are at for you.
You know, one of the things, when I wrote that essay, one of the things that I was really concerned about was the way that transness, in my experience in Black studies, started to become transgressive being. It was a being that transgressed everything. And it bothered me to the extent that Black trans are Black. Transness doesn't bring them into being any more than Black penises bring Black males into being, or Black bellies bring Black women into being, or Black ears bring Black babies into being. You know, so there was this way in which I think transness was taken up as a transgressive being, rather than thinking about transness as what I call the speculative exercise, in which Blacks have always been trans to everything, to the extent that transness means an excision, a crossing, you know, an assimilability. And so I really wanted to think of Black transness as a philosophical proposition rather than an identity. Because I think for me, when I read trans scholarship, or, you know, talk with trans Black folks, for me, what was interesting about that is that even the protections and fantasies of being that cis identified people covered themselves in, trans didn't have. And they were completely exposed. And I said, you know, this is Blackness, right? This is being completely exposed, as I said before, conceptually homeless. And I didn't want to lose that with Black trans. So I know a number of Black trans scholars thinks about Black trans as almost like a transgressive identity category that leaks through identity, but then at the heart of it, once you peel through the transgress, you find a subject. And you find a subject of being. And words like, phrases like calling into being, really for me, like exposed it. Okay, so now we're just gonna say what we really mean, right? The Black trans can call themselves into being just like the human being can. That's not true, right? Black trans are killed every day more than anyone else. If they could call themselves into being, this would not happen. So I guess part of it was my desire not to lose what I thought was so philosophically urgent that Black transness was teaching Black studies. And I felt that that was being eclipsed by a kind of humanist imperative that was running through Black trans, to bring Black trans into intelligibility as a subject, transgressive and all, but still a subject with subject capacities. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to think about Black transness as a speculative paradigm, because I think Black transness, more than probably anything else, teaches us what Blackness is. It teaches us what living without conceptual protection means. And it teaches us how we are structured within that violence. You know, and it sickens me, you know, day after day, another trans person has died, another trans person, it's like, God, you know, like every day. And you start to wonder, you ask why. Once you start asking the question why, you start to tap into the paradigm that Black trans is teaching us about, right? So that was why I wanted to write that essay. And I didn't want to step on any Black trans scholars' toes. My only intention was to say, I think there's a philosophical lesson that's being missed in our hastiness to forge an identity around Black transness, when we really should be thinking about living in the abyss. I hope that answers.
Fabulous. I'm in love with you. Thank you so much, Dr.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We'll
for your
talk soon.
question.
I'll email you.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes left in case there is a quick question. Jennifer.
I'm so sorry. I did it again. I don't have a question. Sorry.
It's the unconscious. You have a question. There are no mistakes. I'm just playing with you. Okay.
Thank you. Maybe go ahead, Professor Parsard.
Oh, I was just going to offer a final note. You've put so much on the table for us, Professor Warren, and I know we're all so grateful. It occurs to me, you know, thinking with your reply through the Q&A that, you know, if the kind of continuous nature of falling into the abyss is what characterizes being turned into the penis, then you know, perhaps, and I suggest this gently, that the formulation isn't being turned into a Black penis, but turning into a Black penis. So I was just thinking grammatically about that. But
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. It is a turning, and you're right. It's turning into a Black penis, a continual verb, right, without end. And the term, when Frantz Fanon described it as a turned into, I think he meant it as a turning. Right. So, you know, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And with that, we conclude our wonderful gathering. Thank you, Professor Warren, for the very thought-provoking lecture. Professor Parsard for your wonderful comments, and everyone for your wonderful questions. And we conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.